Hi, my name is Benedict for Higher Hertz. In this episode, we are going to be taking an introductory look at Bitwig Studio. Bitwig is now on version 5. I saw Bitwig when it very first came out. Their history is that there were a couple of renegade, retrograde escapees from Ableton's Live. So they were developing that and then stepped out to actually make a direct competitor of it. It seems they didn't like some things that were going on there and said, we're going to do it better. Because it was very Ableton Live focused, I wasn't interested at 1.0 other than to take a quick look. It clearly was cloning a lot of what was happening in Live. Now, before those get upset, this is a set of personal opinions. It is a review based on my lookings, findings, feelings of this. Ableton Live is a fine DAW. Most DAWs are fine. There are a few that are not. But if you have fun in them, great. If somebody doesn't agree with you, remember they have as much right to an opinion as you do, and seeing things from a different point of view sometimes allows us to see something different. Either reinforce, hey, this is the right way for me, which is brilliant, so you don't need to waste time looking at other plugins or other DAWs or whatever, or to go, you know what, I've got a different idea now. This is why we need to have robust discussion, not hand grenade lobbing. So there will not be any hand grenade lobbing happening this time, as there have been for some other DAW opinions reviews that I have done. If I say something you don't like about your Precious, suck it up, Precious. All right, so Bitwig came out. They were going in a direction that didn't appeal to me. Ableton Live were doing amazing things with audio before anybody else was really on top of it. Okay, yes, there was Acid, but Acid was a little one-dimensional in what it was able to do with audio compared to what Live was doing. Live also had something different from everybody else as such in their clips. They weren't the first people doing it because it was actually there in... I believe Digital Performer had something like it, and Vision had it already, but Live did it in a way that was going to work more in the real time. We won't get too heavily into that, I'll just show you that it's there. Now, the approach that I'm going to take will, of course, be different. A couple of reasons for that. One is I like to be different. Two is that it turns out that I've used up all my available hours, days of preview for Bitwig over the years in which I've been looking at every version that it comes out. So I don't have the ability to save. I can do everything, but I can't close the project. So I put together everything that I might have done in real time to make sure that it is here and we don't have any potential problems. We'll be working around...
is an old punk rocker. He doesn't like to watch the soccer. He calls it boring and silly.
Which is based on a piece of music.
Old punk rocker. He doesn't ever watch the soccer.
And a fabulous vocal supplied by yours truly. I did actually start writing this in Bitwig, but then realized, oh, hang on, I can't carry this through reliably and safely. So I actually carried what I already had from memory, put it into Reason, composed it there, did the recording there. I already done some recording in Bitwig and it worked really, really nicely. So in case you're like, this is how it got to be there, I imported it and did all the work, which I'll show you in the walkthrough later. There are a lot of sections. Now initially Bitwig, like most DAWs, can look a little heavy-handed. We've got these sidebars, which I'm just going to turn off. They do give us lots of the usual useful information, but it's overkill in my opinion. You've also got this, thing that you can use to drag stuff in. I don't want it there until I want it, and there's a nice way for that to happen, as you will see as we go through. Now, the initial feature was this clip scene kind of thing. I do not understand it. I can broadly say what it is in the sense that you can create these little loops, MIDI audio, whatever, loops that you can then fire off and make them all happen in real time. Past that, I have no knowledge. I put something into it. It seemed to work, but I don't know how it should work or what I would do with it because I have zero interest. But it's there. It's done by the same people who did Ableton Live, who we shall loosely say pioneered this thing, and therefore it is obviously good. If you're into that kind of stuff, it's going to make a lot more sense. Go read their website. They have a good website. There's a lot of training material with videos and what have you. And there are quite a few YouTubers doing the, here, you can do these things in Bitwig type people out there. I know because I look at them every now and then to be like, ooh, Bitwig, what are they doing? I'm going to be staying in good old-fashioned basics because that's what this review's about. How do we start with it? Is it pleasant to use? Is it going to allow us to get there? Well, it definitely allowed me to get there because I made up a song on the spot, and it works. So, sidebars gone, clips gone. There is the arrange view, which is pretty much what we expect. Okay, we're not seeing extra clips and what have you, but that's just because I brought all this in as a MIDI file and the audio stem. Everything came in very, very nicely. It came in very, very neatly inside a group. Yes, there are groups which you can open and close. Groups aren't my favorite thing, but I do understand why people like them and see the sense in them. They're there. You don't have to use group tracks. You can actually create your own buses in the old school SSL kind of bus approach. There are probably two ways of doing that, but you can do buses. You've got to work out how to do it. If I remember in the mixing, I will show you. So it brought in all the MIDI there. I just created the instruments, dragged each of those clips off to the new track, created what I needed to make it funk, which we will go through later in the walkthrough. Arrange is nice and clear and simple. We can have a section, a selection area, which we can loop. All the usual sorts of basic features are there. Transport's nice and clearly in the transport, not sort of buried away somewhere. I'm used to having the transport down the bottom, but up the top is a very common thing. You'll see these row of buttons. It is possible to actually change them. So if I want automation right to become a button, I click it and automation right is now up there. Unclick it, it goes away. So you can, to a certain extent, modify your interface a little bit. If it were me, I'd probably be going through and getting rid of a lot of this stuff because to me, less is always better. But it's a slightly different approach to handling the menu thing, and it does work quite well. Most of these things are also accessible through the right-click thing. Edit. So the next view is Edit View, and here is one that I prepared earlier. This is our whole piece's MIDI bar the drums. So we can actually see different tracks all in on top of each other. None of these sit literally on top of each other. They are a bit spaced out. Unlike in Reason, where clicking on this would focus that track for working on, I would need to click over here to the pencil to say, okay, now this is the track that I'm working on. I did fall for that a couple of times, but their logic is solid enough. To get to this ability to view lots of things at once, then you just have to turn this on and then choose, control click to choose all the things that you want to see at once. So the piano roll is very nice. The piano roll also has the ability for a whole lot of note expression material. So just the usual MIDI controllers are there, but you can also get into polyphonic and MPE. The polyphonic stuff works with the Bitwig synths. MPE, you require an MPE synth. Neither the polyphonic nor the MPE will work with a standard basic synthesizer that doesn't have that functionality. But it does make for a pretty advanced ability to put finesse in. If you don't know what that means, ignore it. But somewhere down the track, if you want to get funkier with per note pannings or per note modulations, it can be done in here. I didn't get into it because obviously it gets a little bit more finicky, and I'm not a fan of finicky, but it is there, and I anticipate that it will work as elegantly as everything else in here. Sidebar, you do have access to extra control thingies. and the operators and expressions and what have you actually allow you to alter what the MIDI's doing. I'm not going to get into it, but it's there and it's actually quite cool. So there's a lot more that the MIDI can do here than your vanilla DAW. So there's more than what Reason can do in here for the ability to modify things. That is cool. MIDI here is very nicely done. If you're in the drum machine thing, then you can press this, which just collapses to only the notes that are being used, which is potentially useful for someone somewhere. I just don't think like that. But it is good. We've then got, let's go back to the arrange, what I'll refer to as rack. It's no doubt got a name, or device panel, but in Reason it's called the rack, where we've got all our instruments. So per track we can see all the things. This looks just like Ableton Live, and while I don't like it as much as Reason, it is coherent and far easier to use than this approach, because just looking at this tells me virtually nothing in terms of mixing. And yes, this is the mixing interface. Group channels, if you've used them here, you can again pull them all together. So I could mix my drums and bass individually, put them into the rhythm bus, which in this case is a group track, and then close it up. If you've got lots of tracks, channels, what have you, then this will help you there if you want to do that. If you were looking to create a bus in the more traditional sense, which is another audio channel, then you seem to do that by creating an audio track, and then I always have to remember it's Control R to rename, which is odd. Why they don't use F2, I'm not sure. Call that bus. Now I can take my drums, and instead of them going to the masters, I can send audio to the track called bus. I start playing
Ben
now.
is an old punk rocker.
So it's just the drums. So obviously I could send several things there. If I send this there as well, I've now created a bus. And personally, I would rather have that here and not this group thing. So if you want to think in terms of buses, it is definitely doable. Let's delete him. Gone. Bye. Bye. So mixing is nice, and it's nicer than I thought it was going to be, because I'm so ingrained in what happens in Reason and the more visual format that I was a little concerned, how's it going to be? It's the first time I've really actually mixed a track. Not that this is a good track by anyone's estimation, but it's all the processes of mixing have gone into this. There is also another screen, which you won't find straight away, but if we go into String uses it, a thing called the grid. The grid is a fully software modular environment in which you can pull in from a whole lot of modules and create any kind of modular doohickey that you need to do whatever you need to do. I have barely scratched the surface of it. I've seen some people do some pretty nice things with it. So if you're getting the full version of Bitwig, you get a full synth edit, whatever style, modular thing built of little modules that you can make monsters out of. And that's a really nice thing. It seems to work well. I haven't worked out how to do polyphonic, but it does work well. It sounds good. Everything in Bitwig sounds good. There is, of course, the fact that at the moment we're sitting in one screen, and it does handle one screen really quite well, especially without these annoying side panels. They're good, they add information, they just annoy the hell out of me because there's clutter. I don't want all that stuff at once. And most of it I can access through right-clicking, or of course just moving to here because I can see things that I would probably be looking for here. But there are various ways of viewing the information. But you're probably also going to want to have several monitors. I've got 3 monitors because I use 3 screens for Reason. Reason was designed for 3 screens, and it's so much nicer that way. This allows you to have up to 3 screens, or at least it's offering me 3 screens, which I've got. So I've got a pair of 24s and a 19 sitting in the middle, and you can choose how you want to arrange your bits and pieces on each. And if you set up what you want in the lower half, you can set that to off here. And say perhaps have your instruments and your MIDI over here and your mixer here, then it all works and it all seems to stay quite consistent. It doesn't seem to expect you to set out layouts that you have to save and then open and this, that, and the other. You can set templates for when you open. And knowing me, I'd set a template which was just, that's the workspace that I want it to look like and behave like, and probably a limiter across the masters, not to push into, just to make sure nothing goes past you, because you shall not pass. That's really all of that. So let's have a look at who are Bitwig. Well, as I've said, they're ex-Ableton people. Exactly what their corporate structure is now. They've grown over the years. They started pretty simple, and their program is really filling out. They've been very open about version 1 was a hello world, and that they are still growing. One of the things that's gone in this time is audio comping. So for you sing a vocal, and this is nice, I tested this, and I'm not generally into comping at all. I'm like, just get it right. But you can set it to loop, and you just keep singing over and over. Every time it goes around, it puts it into a new recording, like a sub-recording, so you don't end up with lots and lots of tracks spawning themselves. You'll just have vocal, or whatever you've named it, and then when you open that up, then you've got the ability to actually put that into, I don't think it's offering it to me, you can put it into the comping mode, and the comping allows you to choose the bits you want very, very clearly. So its comping is impressive and well, charming. It's just easy to use. It only takes a few moments to work out how to actually do it. So that's cool, but they're still adding features like this. Some people, as always, at every door are like, but it doesn't. But all the things that it does do, I think, are really, really, really good. Obviously, they're not a huge door. They're not the first name that comes across a lot of people's lips, but they have very cleverly worked out that rather than trying to be a huge door, they're going to be a special door, and they're definitely that. A lot of Reason users, like real Reason lovers, will say, hey, if Reason died, I'd probably go to Bitwig, because it's as unique as Reason is in its own way. It's perhaps not as unique in certain ways. In some ways, it's a bit more conventional, or like the traditional door thing, but it's still got this spark to it, which is a bit uncommon. Now, they have just rearranged how you buy it. You used to have an 8-track or 16-track, a cut-down version. That's what I talked about as one of the best entry-level doors in the video that I did a year or so ago about, well, best door for beginners. And I had Bitwig as my number 2, Reason my number 1, Bitwig as my number 2. They've now just got 3 versions of the software, which are not track limited or heavy feature limited. You don't get the fancier features, but you've still got a pretty open palette. So you can start at as low as $99, $199, and then the full studio, which is $400. Everything that you're seeing here, all the features that you see here, they're all part of the full studio, and things like the grid definitely are studio. So you can start as a beginner, not wanting to invest an awful lot of money, with the $99, and then just upgrade as you see the need to, as you're hitting the walls. And that's kind of probably where I would recommend that you go if you're starting this as a first door, rather than just going, oh, it's got everything, it's going to be more pro. because you're probably going to just drown yourself with stuff. The door will look exactly the same and in many ways behave exactly the same. There are just certain things that you're not going to need today that aren't available to you until you upgrade. If I were moving, if Reason went overnight, then I would buy the full studio version because the grid. There are a few other things, but the grid is to me kind of the killer feature. There are other things in there that would be like, oh yeah, I'd rather have that than not, but the grid is the exciting one. We might as well look through the good and bad. What do I think? Obviously, I like Bitwig, always have, from whence I realised, oh, this actually behaves a little differently. It is elegant, and really what I mean by this is it feels like a creative space for me to work in. Most doors feel like opening Excel in Windows 3.1, and no one feels creative, or at least no normal person feels creative in that environment. I feel creative in Bitwig. It's a slightly different feel from Reason, but I still feel creative. I feel like I want to expand and I want to keep working on a piece of music. Most other doors, if I start writing something in them, normally under sufferance, it's only a matter of time, normally about an hour before I go, I want to leave here, I want to go home. I've worked 2 hours just today alone and quite a lot of hours over the last week, trying various things, which I had to dump at the end of the session, and at no point have I felt like I want to leave. Sometimes it's been like, oh, that's just not, but then I've worked out how to do it another way, and it's like, yeah, that flows. Bitwig is elegant, its workflow works. Obviously that doesn't work for everybody, but that to me is the killer feature of Bitwig. It does sound good. Does it sound quite as good as Falcon that I just reviewed? No. But is that going to be a problem? Nah, not at all. It just does sound a little nicer and warmer than Reason. But Reason does have a pretty hard, brutally digital, brittle kind of sound to it. It doesn't stop you from making anything as warm and lovely as you want, but it doesn't sound like that instantly. Whereas Bitwig does sound like that, but it doesn't seem to be a problem in terms of mixes. Sometimes with that, oh wow, sounds amazing, I finished the mix, take it somewhere else. No, I have not taken this somewhere else because I can't export it. And I've gone, oh, that just sounds muddy. Because they're too busy making it not sound digital. I don't get the impression that's going to be a problem here, and things that I hear other people do doesn't make me think, oh, that sounds crappy. So I think it sounds good. Obviously, the grid. I'm big on the grid. I think the grid is a wonderful thing. I haven't used it much, but if it works as well as it appears to work, then it's an absolute bonus. It's a wonderful thing, because I would miss the modularity within Reason. That puts this within another door that's high quality. Yes, MooTools has a similar sort of thing, but it's not the same playing field as Reason or Bitwig. It's a cheapie. It's a cool cheapie, but it's not the same level in the world. And I've already mentioned the vocal comping. That is elegant. That's very nicely done. It's very easy. Bads, I should put some. Well, it is starting to get a little menu. The more features they put in, the more we're having this sort of stuff. But as much as is reasonably done, I think it is reasonably done. It all works well, and everything is pretty sensible. So I'm not going to complain too much about that at all. It just is inevitable. As a door grows and more people want those little finicky features that they're too lazy to do themselves, then the more this will tend to happen, that you'll tend to have menus and sub-menus and what have you, but it is nothing compared to something like Reaper. It is different. Now, I've put that in as a bad simply because I know that other people are going to be like, it's not exactly the same as... and that's a good thing. You just got to accept that this is different. If you expect it to be exactly the same as what you're currently using, why are you looking at something different? This has a slightly unique footprint and way of working. And if you flow with it, I think you can move quickly. Because I find that I can move quickly and intuitively. I don't even know where the RTFM is for this thing. I haven't looked for it. I haven't felt the need to look for it. If I'm unsure what something is, down the bottom of the screen here, it's telling me what I'm hovering over and the most likely things that I can do with various key commands. It's helped me through the couple of times where I sort of went, okay, I did watch a video on the comping thing, and when I found the right video, it was like, oh, okay, that's really easy. So I only needed a beginner pointer. Okay, if you are a beginner, you probably need more help than I do because I've been doing this for 30 years over lots of doors. But if I only need a pointer, oh, okay, then I can go off and do it. That's good. That's really, really good. So no actual complaints at all that I've encountered in the short time that I've used it for what we're doing. All right, part 2. This is the fun bit of the program. I have created this amazing
punk rocker
track,
He doesn't like to watch the soccer.
which has somehow put itself into...
Benedict is an old...
I think I may have upset it.
Benedict...
Yes, okay. I know what happened because I was meddling around with these. So these have gone to no output. We need to put them back to... actually, no, not master. They need... maybe it is master.
Benedict
Yes.
is an...
Okay, back to master, but then they get picked up by this bus. So if I mute this...
Benedict is an old punk. Doesn't need to...
Okay, no, it needs to go to... Huh. Maybe I'm looking in the wrong place. I think I might have broken the routing here. Let's see if I can ungroup. Ungroup, which means that I will have broken my processing. So I may have to pause just to redo some processing. Or maybe I can just show it in real time if you'll bear with me.
Benedict is an old punk rocker.
Yep, that's broken. It's lost my processing. But we'll come back to that. So I've got my track. I've brought in the MIDI, put it out into individual instruments. So we'll work our way through them. The only content that I downloaded was a collection of classic drum machines. They're not particularly clean classic drum machines. They're I don't know where they've come from, but they're all processed. So if you open the 606, it doesn't really sound like a 606. I know because I had one. That's fine. Most people don't want the sound of a real 606. They want it processed. So, but the sounds are good. The kits are okay once you work out how it works. It's a massive number of potential heads. So it's kind of a front for a whole lot of little simple sample players. And then you can modify the contents of each head here, which I did do because that kick just went on forever and there was a whole lot of mush in the bass, which wasn't serving anybody. So, nice enough little drum set. I used whatever that kit was because it just played kind of properly. We will fold up the drum machine and we can actually turn those off as well. I didn't get into what these are. They're some sort of controllers, so like macro controls is my understanding. I played with a few things, but I ended up putting it through, and it's good to see. Hertz multiplier. So this is a VST3. I believe this is the VST3 version that is pulled up. And so you can see, obviously, we can use VST. We can use VST 2.4s, we can use VST 3s, but we can also use 32-bit VST because a lot of my old Synth Studio Pack stuff is all there and runs. So it's a lot broader, definitely a lot broader than Reason that only runs 64-bit stuff. This will handle 32-bit stuff as well, but this is a modern, new VST 64-bit VST 3. And so I just wanted to give a little bit of extra drum space here. So we close him down, we can close him down, and then some EQing. We'll dig into the EQ a little bit more later. So that's our drum kit, and then our bass. Our bass, there's a little bit more happening with our bass. So if we turn off all our parts, Let's start here. I turned off the instrument itself. I do find that frustrating, and it makes sense in context that the instrument is in the middle of things, but I kind of like an instrument box that's separate from the effects box. So it's sometimes a little frustrating, and nor is there a button to turn off just the effects. The same is the case in most DAWs. There isn't a way to say, look, just play the synth, forget all the effects units. Okay, so this is the MIDI that's come in. As you can tell, it's not the most exciting. So I gave it an arpeggiator. With a little bit of meddling around. Some velocity control, although I'm not sure whether that's having much control here, and gate control. Moved it across 2 octaves. So it's just giving it a little bit of movement and groove. Added Polymer as a sound source. Polymer is quite cool. Polymer is actually modules from the grid. So any of these modules here, it's really essentially a single oscillator synth with a sub. I can pick whatever of the filters out of the grid I want, whatever oscillators out of the grid that I want. Whether you get this in the $99 version, you would have to have a look. But it's not the first synth. There's another simpler polyphonic synth in here, but this is pretty cool. So it's a semi-modular synthesizer with a footprint like an SH-101 or a Jupiter 4 or something like that. And it sounds good. The different filters sound very different, like very, very different. This SVF, the state variable, will squeal like no other filter that I've heard. It's pretty cool. And so I'm getting this sort of Juno 106 type sound in a classic sort of a mold here. It's a real high energy thing. And then there's this where you can actually bend notes. So this is one of the MIDI effects where you can actually bend notes. So I've had this just bend up slightly. Flat. It's very tiny because when I made it more pronounced, it started to become out of tune inside the actual mix. But nonetheless, that is pretty cool. So there are a lot of features in here that where we can do MIDI type stuff. That's the bend, note echoes. These are MIDI echoes, not audio echoes. Harmonizing, humanizing. There's one for or dribble, which creates a bounce. Bing, 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 bing. So it bounces MIDI notes out. And then there's another one which is even more complex, ricochet, where it bounces off walls. So it's a little bit like a ray trace type approach to working out what notes come out. I didn't look into it, but it's kind of cool. So what we're looking at here is that we can actually hot swap any of these things. Like I can say, okay, and what happens actually if I do ricochet? If I go, I don't want that, I can go back where I was. So it's quite unique in Endure that I've noticed this, that you can actually audition things in real time without opening them, as along with hot swapping. That is actually a nice feature. You don't have to drag something in and commit to it. You can go, I'll try that. Nah, don't want that. Hit cancel, it's gone. So we've got a cool sound using delay. Everything has the ability to modulate. I believe there's the ability to modulate outside of a single track, or at least I hope there is. But nonetheless, there's the ability to do quite a bit of modulation. So I've added this LFO and assigned it to, and your assigning is slightly funny, but you get used to it. You click here, this is flashing, and now it shows you all the possible targets. So if I wanted to move that to here, then I would do this, and you can see that it's modulating. If I want to get rid of that, then I can just go here and get rid of it. And then you've got to turn that off. So you can turn it on and assign lots of times. So it's one of those ones you've got to get used to. If you modulate here, it doesn't actually do the pitch movement that you anticipate. It kind of just changes the timing, at least with this one. So you've got to modulate there. That's just the thing that I learned. So that's pretty cool. And then EQ. I sometimes wonder if this EQ isn't auto level matched. If that were the case, I would not be delighted, or at least I would be delighted to find a way to switch it off. Because it just doesn't feel like you can hear the level differences. And people are like, you shouldn't. And it's like, yeah, you need to hear the level difference because you're changing things. If you change things and they sound the same, you're not changing anything. But you do have the adaptive, so it narrows the cue that's an SSL type thing, and that's nice. And something with this is that you can open it up in the full screen so you can really see what's going on. To be a lot clearer, I opened this up to do my what have you, on off, and then it becomes just a list of your features down there, and you've got to find the little close button. Initially you're like, what do I do? I'm stuck with it. But once you realize it, it's pretty easy. So what people call a Pro Q3 kind of a layout. It is cluttered, but it works nicely. You can choose the range at which you want to work. But as I've said, it just feels like, at least with the 10 dB range, that there isn't a radical difference. So it works. I got nothing against it. If we want that there, we can just turn it off or double click to make him go away. So now we have drums and bass. Now I'm going to put these back through. So just to show you how this works, because I messed it up, I can just start typing compressor. Now I've either got to hit OK or drag and drop or whatever. This has an auto makeup gain I don't like because it just makes everything louder. So I'm just looking for that point where okay, I feel like we've got a bit more groove happening there. I'm looking at the gain reduction, like what's being chopped off. These are designed for some really heavyweight compression, but just really watch out because that can become very, very choppy. As I found the hard way after doing something, it was like, oh yeah, and then oh, it sounds really choppy in the mix. So I would rather set my makeup myself than have this do it because I feel like most of these makeup gains is heavy-handed and aggressive. Now I will require an EQ, which I will commit to because I know that that's what I want. Let's pop it in here. Now, you see I can choose various things by looking at the cursor. I'm going to want that to be a fairly heavy roll-off. And I'm going to use the mass wheel to narrow that cue. I'm just looking for punch, I'm not looking for bass. That's actually pretty good. Excessive. cardboardy, so smooth him out a little bit. Now this treble is just excessive. That's probably about right. So that's now my bus working. I can hop out of this, right back where I started.
Benedict is an old punk rocker. He doesn't like to what?
The reverb is now missing. Now remember, I don't send reverb from the individual channels, I send it from here. Now I can open this up, double click to send it back, or triple click to set a value.
Benedict is an old punk rocker.
Now that's too much reverb, as expected. So we'll pull that back.
Oh, silly. Benedict is still an old punk rocker.
Okay, great. So that's our drums and bass. Then there was the brass instrument, which was where I started writing this. So let's set that there. Use phase 4, which is a phase distortion, so Casio CZ, and broad FM kind of synth. It is ugly. It can sound great, but it's ugly. It's not for the faint of heart to begin with. There is an ability to see what's happening a lot more, but don't walk into this thinking that it's going to make sense straight away. You're probably going to want to RTFM or watch some videos on it. I know I watched some videos on it a while ago, and I sort of think, yeah, it's really pretty cool. But in terms of first looking at it, like, how am I going to navigate that? It is complex, but is a complex synth that's put into a tiny footprint. So we'll let them go on that one. Chorus. This chorus has got a few different modes, obviously based on some classic units. And then like 8 multi-voice, what have you. Be careful with the multi-voice ones. While they sound fabulous, they can very easily make everything just far too much. So the CE was the nice one in this case. Although without it, it helps that sound cut too. The problem with using, yeah, how it doesn't cut the mix anymore. Not to mention sounding out of tune. So changing that a little bit has that come out clearer in the mix. Dynamics. This is really an OTT style thing. I just thought I'll use it here as just as a single direction compressor, but you can have it do this kind of stuff as well. Just, I'm not really an OTT kind of guy, but it is cool that you can move in peak or RMS modes. I'd used it a few times over various things, and I think that once you get used to its quirks, the fact that you've got these two sets of thresholds, it is pretty cool. Looks like there's a key that you can fly in a key from somewhere else. So if you need to do ducking, which is a proper term for side chaining, otherwise we'd be carring every time we go pick up our relatives, then that's all there. And something that you may have noticed is that there are extra little boxes here. That means that you can actually open up a port and process something that's inside the loop of the device that you're working on. So if I'm working on the delay here, I can open up feedback effects and I can put something in the feedback loop. So I could put a ring modulator in there and it's going to add more ringfulness until it explodes in the middle of the chain. That is nice. A lot of DAWs make that very difficult to do. This makes that very easy to do. And over a lot of devices have that ability. So we got the dynamics controlled, little tiny bit of drive. When you first turn this on, it's excessive. It's like, but it is supposed to be a drive unit, so I guess it's supposed to be dramatic. I couldn't come to terms with the saturation. That's not to say that it's bad. I just couldn't immediately, and I was trying to move quickly, work out how to get the result that I was looking for. So I ended up using this just very softly, just for a little tiny bit of catch. And then, of course, we're going into a delay. Same thing with some modulation. I, of course, put everything into free time. So a slap back with a little bit of ducking. So that allows the sound itself to come forward a little bit before it gets too caught in its delays, its echoes. And the old EQ. You see here there's I guess it is only 2.4 dB. It just feels like this very mild kind of EQing, but you can get where you want to get to. Sometimes I just feel like I'm moving this a lot further than I think, but maybe I just need to be in the 20 mode. It'd be nice if I could default that. Set to default. Yes, I can. There you go. No. Oh, no, okay, now that sets it back to what the default is. That's not what I want. I want to set that as the default. So that would mean that I would need to come along and automatically click it to 20 every time. It is nice in the sense that it's got this range, because if you're working on more of a mastering kind of a process, then plus minus 10 is excessive. But if you're working in a sound design, 20, 30 is plenty, then they make an awful lot more sense. So personally, I would probably say it makes more sense to default to this, but it's a nice EQ. There are lots of other kinds of EQ options there as well, but I used the cool one. Then we've got our string sound.
Benedict is an old punk rocker.
You saw this before. This is the grid. I won't get into it too much, but it's I didn't work out how to make this polyphonic, but I believe it will be. I'm prepared to be wrong, but I was pretty sure that it was able to be polyphonic. I mean, it says poly. It'd suck if you couldn't make it polyphonic. There's probably just a thing you've got to use. So that nice SVF, the ADSR, you can actually change some of the shape of things, so that's pretty cool. And then wire stuff up. I'm not going to get into that heavily. If you understand this kind of stuff, you're going to go, okay, you've basically got it all already. It's good, sounds great, allows you to do all kinds of things, and put it in a box to manage it as well. So we've got one LFO for our vibrato here, another one working here. So that's two of them. A chorus. Let's just so that's using the 8-voice chorus, which is really nice for this sort of situation. And I put the mix at 100% for that sort of ensemble feel. Well, that is nice back a little bit, to be honest. A fairly heavily modulated but slow modulation on this. So we're getting into, without any real effort, we're getting into a Gary Newman, not really Vox Humana, but a real Gary Newman string sort of sound straight away, while still being monophonic and having some of the elements of a string machine to it. Cool. And then the EQ. But it needs to behave well in the mix when it first comes in. I don't want it overtaking anything. So that this is a mix EQ to make sure that it behaves nicely in the mix. No one's going to know any different because it's just the sound. Back to here. Just mute him. I'd started before I decided it was going to be a song. It was all pretty random because I was just messing around. So we've got this balance in terms of the mix. You can see here reverb, pan here. This is a little bit of a funny surface. It feels short. I've seen quite a few people like me ask, can we make this taller? Because we've got all this space here. Oh, and you can choose what you see. You can show the clip launcher and what have you. Don't want that. You can show our ins and outs. You've seen me using the outs, so that's why that's useful. Showing sends, we're going across to our reverb, which I should show you here. Reverb's nice. You can decrease the diffusion, so you can go pretty smooth to a Benedict Rattley kind of thing. So for a built-in reverb unit, I think there's a lot to recommend it. I don't fully understand this, but again, no RTFM. I'm getting results that are very workable without really understanding all the intricacies of it. There are other reverbs out there, but for a stock unit, this works really, really well. Yes, there is convolution, but not really for me. This shows you where it's receiving signal from, which is interesting, I guess. You can also have it send back feedback to itself, but it does introduce some buffer latency. But there are times you might want to do that in a mix, so it's nice that they've given you the option and, of course, warned you that it may be questionable, but by the time you're doing that, you don't care. So that's kind of an interesting thing that you can send these things back to themselves. I didn't have more than one effect send to see if you can send from one to another. That may have the same issue of creating some buffer latency before the world explodes. But all of that works really, really simply. I need to be looking at this vocal. Let's bring him in. So the initial issue that we have with the vocal, and don't say that it's out of tune, because of course it's bloody well out of tune. Is that it's not very loud.
Benedict is an old punk rocker. He doesn't like to watch the soccer because it's boring and silly.
So that's the raw vocal with my El Cheapo Behringer mic. Happy enough with that. I was vaguely in tune. Amazing. There's very, very light amount of Neptune auto-tuner type thingy across it, but I kept it incredibly light. In no way is this any good, so don't make the mistake of thinking that I think it is. It is a joke. It is made up on the spot. Literally, turned the mic on, took 2 passes, and that's your 2 verses. So Tool. Took me a little bit to find this, but just type in Tool, and you get Tool. And Tool just gives you some basic control over track things. Someone's going ping. And so I added roughly 12 dB of things, and that puts it up into
punk rocker.
comfy territory.
He doesn't like to watch the soccer because it's boring and silly. Oh,
Gate really is just to handle where breaths and stuff. And because there's a certain amount of plosives, I slowed the release down to give us a little less of the plosive. It rolls in rather than in.
Benedict is an old punk rocker. He doesn't like to watch the soccer.
So there's no particular audible difference there with the gate. De-esser, well, I put it in because I should show a de-esser. I'm not a big fan of
He
de-essers.
doesn't like to watch the soccer because it's boring and silly. Oh, silly.
The compressors in Bitwig are good, other than the makeup thing. I just say turn that straight off because it's going to fool you every time. Is that they're designed for very heavy work. So you've really got to be careful. It's great because you can throw an awful lot at them and they handle it with a lot of dignity. But just be cautious.
Punk rocker.
I could have actually bypassed Tool and then used the input here. The downside of that being that when I bypassed to AB, I'd end up with like a 12 dB level difference, which is a little too much to be able to make any useful sense of, so it was better to put it in another tool.
It is an old punk.
Oh, you see the little sleepy thing? That means that they're not doing anything, therefore they are saving resources. On most doors do something
It is an
similar.
old punk rocker.
The attack and release times are geared to the short, and that makes sense seeing it's primarily aimed as an EDM kind of door. You've just got to find the balances. Would I say that this is automatically my favorite compressor? No. I would still probably choose the ADHD. But these are fine compressors. Well, this one alone and the other one, the OTT type tool, they are fine compressors. You just got to find their balances and how they work. But I'm pleased with the results.
Punk rocker.
So we've got that level up now to be fairly consistent.
Watch the soccer because it's boring and silly. Oh, silly.
One thing I wouldn't mind being able to do here, and I don't think it's here, at least I didn't see it, is to be able to see this
is an old punk
display after my EQ, because I think it's showing it to me
rocker.
before.
He doesn't like to watch the soccer.
Or maybe it's showing me after. But it's not quite as clear as I'm used to, but again, like anything, you just get used to it. So I've clarified that vocal. Now we add in the
Is
delay.
an old punk rocker. He doesn't like to watch the soccer.
Seeing there were no backing vocals whatsoever attempted, then I just decided to use the auto doubling type process. So I've gone for a slapback with quite a bit of modulation on it, as you hear.
An old punk rocker.
And then took the very lazy process of just making it a ping pong. So the idea being that
He's an old punk rocker. He doesn't like to watch the soccer because it's boring and silly. Oh,
So if we mute that.
silly. Benedict is still an old punk rocker.
So we just broaden that vocal, fill it out, and make me seem a little less incompetent. That's what I would do with or for anyone as such. I then did later add a second delay.
Punk rocker. He doesn't like to watch the soccer
It's very
because
low in the mix.
it's boring and silly. Oh, silly.
Don't really need to have that one there, but I decided that I would put that
Benedict
in.
is an old punk rocker. He doesn't like to watch the soccer because it's boring and silly.
I feel like it just gives a better sense of space. It's quite common for me to cascade delays into each other, and that vocal can use a little bit of, well, enriching, because it is a little too unique for most listeners. It's bloody terrible. But it's a joke. It's a joke. Then in the mix, I just rode some levels, because as you can see, I come in a little quiet on the beginning of my lines. Not at all.
Benedict is an old punk rocker. He does.
It was pretty clear here.
Benedict is an old punk rocker. He doesn't like to watch the soccer.
Even if a singer hasn't come in quiet, especially if you're going to drop that vocal in the mix quite a bit, then it's not uncommon to do something like that where you just push it a couple of dB at the beginning of the line or the verse, just so that the listener can start to hear it and follow down the track. You will often find when you first meet someone, you sort of lean in and pay attention until you can comprehend their speech, and then you pull back because you've kind of got them. You've found their wavelength and you've found how to understand them. So this is a way of doing that, of pushing it forward. So it's like, oh, I'm getting to hear this clearly, and pulling it back. People won't notice that it's happening. Automation's pretty good. I find automation annoying in most DAWs. I really like it in Reason. Of course, I'm very used to this. This you would get used to. It's not my first favorite, but it's okay and it works. There may be other ways to do automation, but this is here. It works out all right. There is an ability to see it in another lane here so that you can be more up close and personal with it, which I must admit I forgot when I was actually doing it, and it probably would have been a lot nicer to use here than there, but I'm so used to when I click on an automation clip that it expandifies to this sort of size in Reason already. But they've got something that works and is consistent with their thing. If this was popping open here inside, it might not make as much sense. So I have a fully working mix now, and then just those masters, which is over here, and the compressor, which I really had to watch wasn't doing too much work because it started to make things jerky, but that's just glue, so very slow attack.
Benedict is an old punk rocker.
Feel how everything still feels a bit apart?
Soccer. Sad because everyone else likes.
And that turns it more into one. That's glue compression. I added this saturator in.
An old punk rocker.
As I said, I couldn't actually understand their saturator, so I decided to just go with the first thing that came to mind, which was Bedroom Producer Blog's saturator. And it's like, okay, just a little bit of goose. Their saturator, again, is probably really good. You just need to kind of understand how to get soft stuff out of it rather than splaturation.
Benedict is an old punk rocker.
The master
to watch
EQ.
the soccer.
Tiny push at the punch point.
Everyone else likes the soccer and says that he's a loser. Well.
You can solo each section.
An old punk rocker. Doesn't need to like the soccer.
I was just looking for punch at that point.
Because only losers like the soccer.
So just a little bit, just to give it a little bit of sparkle, and then our final
Benedict is an old punk.
limiter. Very simple limiter set to automatically to -0.3 on you, and then just pushing it so that in the, and you can't see it here, but in the meters here, which you do have to turn on,
Is an old punk.
but without them on, it would save your CPU or GPU or whatever's running
Is
it.
an old punk rocker.
This is set to RMS and peaks, so RMS at 0 as far as I'm concerned, because I run a -12.
And says that he's a loser.
But we're not got any clipping.
Well, Benedict is an old punk rocker. Doesn't need to like the soccer. Because only losers like the soccer.
Now we can push a little harder if we want to. I just don't particularly want to because it's just not as necessary. But this shows you where you've got peaks. You can double click, and so it shows you the loudest thing. Useful information, which is common indoors. Reason doesn't have it, but it is common indoors, and most people are going to find it useful. I'm not opposed to it. I don't feel the need for it, but I'm not opposed to it being there. So that is the piece mixed and all done. And from here, I would go and export it and listen to it in the lounge on the sub and everything like that. But there's no need to do that because this is just for a review. So we've got to an hour. It's a really nice piece of software. This whole turning MIDI into a finished mix took, with software that I'm really largely unfamiliar with, it took me 2 hours. A more complex mix using software that I'm fully familiar with would be about 4 hours once I've set up the mix, as in prepared all the tracks, made them tidy, have it so that I understand it. So in terms of something that I don't understand from Nothing But MIDI, is, I think, really pretty decent time working. So at no point did I feel like, oh my God, I'm spinning my wheels. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do this, which is what I feel like in pretty well every DAW. And again, absolutely no RTing of the FM, and achieved this and am, as such, happy with it, which is why I think it's elegant and feels creative, because I can work quickly. Obviously, I could get more value out of certain things were I to wisely R the FM, but there's no need to do that if you've got any understanding of what's going on. Now, that does not mean that if you don't have a lot of understanding, decades of understanding, that you can just be a loose cannon like me and go, well, I'll just wing it because I'm excellent. I'm winging it as part of a point to see how well can I do it, and it holds up really, really well. It always feels like it sounds nice. As I say, I haven't checked it elsewhere, but there's a certain sound that's not that sort of hard, brittle, slightly papery thing that's in Reason, but I don't think it's going to come out kludgy, which I have found with some of the DAWs, as I said before. So overall, very, very pleased with the workflow. There's an awful lot more things that can be done under the hood, especially if you want to get into audio stretching and firing off loops and this, that, and the other. But as I said from the beginning, I was absolutely not going to get into that, because my role here is to look at the overview and just like, how is this going to work for somebody who just opens it, especially somebody who doesn't have a ton of experience, because we deem that to be most of our audience. And I would say this is an absolute wonder. How I would feel if I were to come into Reason now without knowing it. You know, if I were running a different DAW, I might find a bit of like, oh, because there are some things that are different. To me, it's completely first nature. Now, it's not even second nature, it's first nature. But I always found it very intuitive. This I find surprisingly intuitive, while still having some of those recognizable elements of the more traditional, not so keen on kinds of DAWs, without that being intrusive. So like the mixing surface here, I don't like, but I still found that it wasn't a disaster. It wasn't a problem. I could use it until I said, no, this is annoying, and then move across to something which is more visual. Obviously, we can close things down, but we can open up and see this. The downside being, once you've got a lot of stuff, then it becomes harder to see without scrolling backwards and forwards. One thing it doesn't have, and Reason's the only DAW that does this that I know of, is a click on a track, be able to see its mix EQ. But Reason's the only DAW that does that. That's something that I will always miss in any situation, to sort of have this EQ that sits there and is always visible based upon whatever I have focused. But as I say, that's a really rare thing, so to expect it here is perhaps unfair, because there's only, as I say, one player that I know of that does that. Really, I don't see any downsides here. Everything sounds great. Where I used the sampler and just dragged a sample in and what have you, it was simple, but it was like, oh, that's easy to use. I'm getting results that sound fabulous instantly. There's no struggle. Some things move a little faster than Reason, probably in that sense, especially in terms of just launching a sound and having it sound great. That works really, really fast. Obviously, Phase 4 is a little more complex, so I wouldn't recommend anybody start there. But something simple like the Polymer, or the other, what's the other basic synth? Polysynth is...
And it is an old punk rocker. He doesn't like to watch the soccer.
Is cool. So it's very eminently usable. None of these instruments are, as such, with the possible exception of the Grid, none of them are designed head-on to compete with a Europa or a Dune or a whatever. But if you understand what you're doing, and this has a wavetable oscillator, there's a huge amount that can be worked with in here. There also appears to be, I did not try it, something similar to Combinator, a box in which you can put a whole lot of other boxes. And so if you want to make a more complex synth of 4 layers, then you could run 4 polymers, which are running different things to create a 1080 kind of 4-layered sound. In terms of sound bank, there seems to be a fair amount of it, but as I said, I only downloaded the retro drum machine things, which I don't believe to be remotely accurate. They probably do involve those instruments originally because they do sound like that, but they are processed, they're not pure. But there is a piano, and there probably is a sound set which is okay. Whether there's something enough to carry you through basic orchestral stuff, oboes and what have you, I don't know, but it's a very synthesis-oriented kind of a DAW, so it's not really to be expected. Reason having orchestra is a little unusual, and it was a selling feature at the time. People are very sniffy about it now, but if you know how to handle it, orchestra is still worth an awful lot. The library here is going to be a little bit more skewed towards loopy, choppity kind of stuff, which is probably going to appeal to most people, but despite not being one of those people coming from a more traditional, alt punk rocker kind of approach, I feel very comfortable here. So my final words is I think it's a winner, and that it's developing very, very nicely, and that if you are finding the average DAW that you use very and techie, like as I always say, like you're stuck in Excel in Windows 3.1, then put them aside and spend a little bit of time in Bitwig or Reason, because they will probably flow a lot nicer for you. If you find that Bitwig or Reason just doesn't seem techie enough for you, great, go open Reaper. You'll probably be like, oh my, how wonderful is this? We've got different streams of people. Conclusion, Benedict again for Higher Hertz. There's higherhertz.com, different stream of information. If you have any questions, not about Bitwig, I'm not Bitwig support. You've seen my extent of use largely. Subscribe and pop that down below, but please have watched the program first. If you ask me something that's discussed in the program, I'm either not going to answer or maybe if you're silly enough, you'll even get deleted. Not because we're trying to be mean, but we're just trying to have productive conversations. Somebody asking something that was in the first 5 minutes of the program really just tells us they didn't watch the program, so they didn't engage with us, we're not going to engage with them. Not to be mean, simply because the person's not interested. If you're interested, you will watch these long programs. Even if it takes you a while, you'll watch the long programs. Because this is your craft. It's my craft. I will watch long programs. I've read through massive manuals. Taken time, but read through massive manuals. Really like, oh. And then you find the deeper things that you can do in your craft. Well, my craft anyway. All right, the most important thing is get out there. The demo that I'm using here doesn't allow you to save, but if you haven't used all of your time, then it gives you 30 days fully functional, so you can save and reopen and spend your time with it, which I think is very fair. And I would have probably had a different approach, which wouldn't have been as much fun as this one, I think. All right, get out there. You have a great day.